Dead Ends, written by Jonathan Dunne, narrated for you by the author. Dead Ends 8. Crossbreed. When the Mackenzie family set off on their yearly camping trip, they didn't know they would and wouldn't be returning home. There was great excitement that mid-July morning when the four Mackenzies and Scruff, the family mutt, piled into the shoddy old camper van for their yearly camping trip in the wilds of Old Castles National Park, which was a 4-hour drive away, down in the southwest of the country. 12-year-old Jason and his 14-year-old sister Layla sat in the back with Scruff, while their mom and dad, Brendan and Elizabeth, were up at the front. Elizabeth was driving while Brendan played his own songs on his guitar. Let's just say his family was a captive audience. Despite Bob Dylan wannabe Brendan's erratic performance, life was good. But like everything else on the weighing scales of life, the Mackenzies would have to take the good with the bad. 16 long Brendan songs later, the Mackenzies' camper van pulled into a cafe on a secluded stretch of road. Jason was feeling nauseous in the back seat with all the sharp turns on the snaking road, and his father's music didn't help. Jason had never been a good traveller. As a child, he would feel sick on the short ride to school, especially on days he didn't feel like going to school. And now the 12-year-old was queasy with his father's lackluster songs. Not that he would say that to his dad. On the sly, his mother and sister thanked him for his impromptu bout of nausea. They went inside the cafe, where the clientele comprised of hikers and families, just like the Mackenzies. Even though the owners of the cafe were a pleasant young couple, they weren't too fond of the idea of allowing the little tearaway terrier into their eating establishment. So the Mackenzies obliged and kept Scruff in the camper van, leaving the windows cracked. He preferred his old basket anyway. They were halfway through a round of ham and pickle rolls when the four Mackenzies paused and shared ominous glances around the table before breaking down in peals of laughter. The midday local news channel was coming from a portable TV at the end of the counter, and the newsreader announced that a family of 4, not too different from the Mackenzies, had gone missing in the area a few days previous, and if anyone had any information on the family's whereabouts, they were to call a number that came up on the screen. According to the newsreader, they vanished off the radar after a camping trip in the remote area of Abbeyleith. She told the studio camera that several people had gone missing in that general area over the last 2 weeks. Despite the worrying news report, the family couldn't help their reaction of hilarity, just biting into their tasty rolls when they all paused, mouths open. It was a nervous gut-buster of laughter because the family in the photo on the screen didn't look all that different from them. It was this resemblance that sent a tenebrous flutter through the Mackenzie clan. This would be their last genuine feel-good moment, despite what was on the little telly. It was lamentable that they didn't appreciate it, but does anyone appreciate the good times? They may think they do until they are in the bad times and look back on the good times and realize they never appreciated what they had. Elizabeth said to her husband, "I saw that Abbeyleith on the map. It's near to here." The Mackenzies were on a roll now, and this comment was met with more laughs. Once Jason was feeling better, they all got back in the camper van and headed west towards the national park. The news report was but a fading memory. Brendan, whose turn it was to drive, tapped on his Google Maps icon on his phone to check for directions, while Elizabeth told him to put it away for the love of God. All these helpful apps, flashing air commas on helpful, are turning us brain dead. Haven't you ever noticed how you have no idea how you arrived at a destination if you used Google Maps to get there? We're being spoon-fed. At the next roundabout, take the 3rd exit on the right, as if we were mentally slow. And that's where we're going, by the way. When I was young, we used road signs and a map, and we remembered how we got to a place because we had to figure it out. We don't need GPS, Brendan. Look out there in front of you. Rant over. The twin peaks of Magrique Mountain, rising high in the hazy distance, marked their destination. We agreed we wouldn't use our phones on this trip. Getting back to nature. Your words, Brens, not mine. You're right. Bad habit, that's all. Brendan Mackenzie switched off his phone and left it in the glove compartment. These phones are shrinking our brains. He pulled his finest twisted zombie face for his wife and laughed. You hear that, kids? Elizabeth asked. Layla replied, watching Netflix on her phone. Jason looked up from his tablet with a lost expression. Have we arrived? Guys, Brendan said in the rearview mirror as he put the camper van into gear and drove away from the cafe car park. You're missing out on life. No, we're not, said Layla. We're as alive sitting here in the back of the van as anywhere else. But don't you want to see this beautiful countryside? Right now you could be at home in your bedroom. When you're looking at a screen, it doesn't matter where you are. You're trapped. Dad, said Jason, I'm not trapped. I'm playing Roblox with Robert and Liam. Brendan shook his head. This is pointless. The sense of adventure and getting lost doesn't exist with these fucking devices. Whatever happened to the expression live a little? I wish they never invented these things, especially phones. Well, opined Elizabeth, you have to change your way of thinking. Phones are here to stay, I'm afraid. And you cannot deny how useful they are when you want to know where the kids are. How poignant Elizabeth's words would be on this very day. Hey, said Brendan, I thought you were on my side. I am. All I'm saying is that we need to be realistic, but put firm limits. I mean, do we really need to be lost? Liz, I'm not talking about lost as literally lost. I'm talking about the camping trip into the wilds, losing the shackles, having that sense of freedom. Our kids don't know what that is anymore. Sometimes it's good to get lost. I wish you'd get lost, Dad, said Layla without missing a beat or looking up from her screen. Brendan laughed, as did his wife. They shouldn't, but their daughter's sense of dry wit and timing was wicked. But Brendan sobered up when he saw the looming thunderheads in the distance. Not 20 minutes up the road from the cafe, Elizabeth Mackenzie was taking back her words about not needing Google Maps. Brendan and his wife exchanged tentative glances, both experiencing that sinking feeling as if they had just driven through an invisible barrier into the unknown. Their gut instincts told them they were lost. They were lost since the moment they left the cafe. About the same time, Brendan switched off his phone, ironically enough. Brendan remembered taking a left off the main road when he probably shouldn't have. Somewhere along the way they made a wrong turning and were now on a back road and didn't see many vehicles. None, in fact. They just knew if they mentioned the lost word, then the kids would be the first to berate them with something like, Are we lost? Asked Jason. The kids may have been living in an alternative reality as far as Brendan and Elizabeth were concerned. But all Jason had to do was take one look out the window and he knew they were lost. Jason, sometimes it's good to get lost, quipped Layla. Didn't you know that? The thunderstorm had crept its way in from the Atlantic and was now over the Mackenzies' camper van. The camper filled with white noise as the rain bucketed down. Brendan turned to his wife. Now is it safe to check Google Maps? He eased his foot off the accelerator. You're hilarious, droned Elizabeth. Because I don't see Magritte anymore, Liz. Elizabeth scanned the area. It was true. The rain was so heavy they couldn't see much further than the thickets on their left and right. Okay, so we're useless without our phones. It's official. Let's just love our phones. Jason said, Scruff needs the toilet. The family dog had got up from his basket and was sniffing around the back door. Me too, chimed Layla. And me, added Jason. Guys, it's lashing out there. You could have gone when we were back at the cafe. But I didn't need to go then, Dad, said Layla. Her brother nodded in agreement. Brendan, don't be silly. That involves foresight. Brendan sighed. This is just typical. He asked the dog, Scruff, you need to go pee? The dog gave a wheezy, half-hearted yap, which wasn't really a bark. The dog hadn't barked for years. That's a number 2 bark, Dad. Scruff doesn't bark, Layla said. You get what I mean, Jason back answered. We need to let him out, Dad. Elizabeth added, I need to go too. Just pull over here somewhere. It'll give us a chance to get our bearings too. Brendan pulled the camper van up on the secluded stretch of road, deciding he needed the bathroom as well. If you can't beat him, join him. They coated up, jumped out and went their separate ways into the undergrowth for a little privacy. Scruff wasn't too bothered about privacy. When Brendan was zipping up, he spotted a lone grey farmhouse down in the vale, surrounded by thick copse of conifer trees, the kind found in cemeteries. Hey, there's a house over there, he announced to the others. What about it? Layla called back, out of sight and squatting amongst some dock leaves. It's not as if we're lost. We're in the middle of fucking nowhere, Jason called from the bushes. I read somewhere that the weirdest shit happens in places like this. This back and forth was like the last scene from The Waltons, where the Walton family says goodnight to each other from different bedrooms. Elizabeth replied, Thanks for that, Jason, from the undergrowth. You're welcome, her son replied. Hey, wouldn't it be hilarious if someone robbed the camper van and drive off while they were out here pissing up against trees, were the very words that dried up in the 12-year-old's throat when they all heard the camper van rev up. Mackenzies came from the vegetation, struggling to pull up zips and latch buttons. What the f... was all Elizabeth had time to say as she jumped out of the ferns, struggling to pull her jeans up. The four Mackenzies stood there in dumb shock, literally caught with their trousers down as the camper van barreled by them, fishtailing down the wet secondary road, its shocks rattling in the rain-filled potholes. It was almost as if the old camper had started up on its own and drove off without them, like an old friend had just turned traitor on them. Battered it may be, but that camper van had been with the Mackenzie family since the beginning, and the kids will grow up remembering the old camper van. Someone just stole our van! Layla screamed, pointing out the obvious. Brendan cried, Did anyone see or hear anything? Nobody had seen or heard anything. Brendan reached for his phone to call the police and swore to the high heavens when he realised he'd left his phone on the dashboard. Who else has their phones? He looked around at the others in desperation. We need a phone. Elizabeth, call the police. My fucking phone's in the van. Layla flashed that look at her. Don't start, snapped her mother. We don't need whatever smart-ass answer you're about to give us now. I said nothing, Layla retorted. But it's just that Dad was going on about ditching our phones and getting lost, and well, Layla, came her mother's whiplash tongue. Shut it. Fuck, Brendan swore. Now what are we going to do? Maybe we can go down to that house and ask them for help, suggested Jason. The one you said you saw, Dad. Where did you say that house was? His mother nodded. Okay, Jason. Good. See, Layla, this is what we need right now. Positive input. But Layla wasn't listening. The 14-year-old was looking around her in confusion. Brendan led his family to the point in the tree line where he saw the house. It was quite far away, tucked down inside a wooded valley. Layla cried, Scruff! The other turned around, expecting to see the dog behind them, but there was no sign of the happy little canine. Where is he? Asked Elizabeth. Oh, shit, said Jason. I think I saw him climb back into the camper. He loves his basket. Layla started to cry. Seeing Layla's reaction set off a panic alarm in Elizabeth. Brendan too felt the first flutter of fear, but tried to keep it hidden. Don't worry, we're going to go across there and get help. Whoever stole the van might not even notice Scruff in his basket. Layla asked. But what if they do? Layla, Scruff is fine. They stole the van. They didn't steal Scruff. They weren't looking to steal a van with a dog in it. Mom, Scruff won't even notice it's not us driving the van. He won't bark. He's too old to bark. And maybe it's better that way, answered Elizabeth. We don't want him to aggravate whoever is behind the wheel of our camper van. She turned to her husband. So what now? We're going down to that house, Brendan pointed out. Elizabeth eyed the lone farmhouse. I think we should turn back the way we came. I don't like the look of that place. Brendan pointed out, in case you hadn't noticed, we are sort of in a crisis here. No phones. Layla was about to pipe up when her father face-palmed her. Liz, whether you like the look of the place is not important right now. I need to get our van and we need to get our stuff. We have everything in the van. Layla interjected. Nobody cares about Scruff. Layla, said Brendan, we all love Scruff, but right now we have more important matters at hand. Our phones are not the only things tied up in the camper van. Our wallets, purses and everything else. Elizabeth was growing more distressed. Our identity cards were in that van. 2023 has been the worst year for identity theft, Jason pointed out. He wouldn't have known this, only he was interested in cybersecurity and hackers fascinated him. The Mackenzies would be the victims of identity theft, but not in the way they thought it would happen. We need to get out of here and find someone who can help us. Do you understand? Layla shook her head in tough defiance. She didn't want to listen to her father. He wasn't as close to Scruff as she was. Which was more important, a stupid phone or Scruff? Come on, that was no competition. The Mackenzie family set off down the country lane, the same lane their camper van had used in the getaway. It lashed rain, and moody thunder rumbled above their heads. As they marched to the sounds of their squelching boots, Brendan wondered what they would find at the end of this little-travelled by-road. As the Mackenzies drew nearer the property, they walked right by a sign overgrown and hidden beneath a clump of brambles, telling them they were now in the nowhere district of Abbeyleith. 5 minutes up the winding road, with a strip of green grass snaking through its middle, 4 individuals were moving along a country road in a rickety camper van, travelling at insane motorway speeds on a country by-road. The van shunted left and right. It might or might not have been the driver's first time at the wheel of a vehicle. It might or might not have been the driver's first time seeing a dashboard and wondering what those pretty coloured lights meant. A little terrier cowered in the interior of their camper van. The dog may be old, but the clever little terrier sensed something wasn't right. The scent rising in his glistening snout told him the 4 occupants of the vehicle were not his loved ones. These 4 individuals didn't sound like his loved ones. They didn't sound like his clan because they didn't make any noise like the others. There was silence in the bouncing, shuddering camper van. Yet the canine was confused. Maths wasn't the terrier's strong point, but it sensed the number in his clan, 4, was correct. At least, from its beady eyes, the dog distinguished 4 human figures, but again the old dog sensed there was something off just by their stillness. His normal clan made incessant noise and moved about the place. These 4, 2 in the back and 2 in the front, may as well be statues. Throughout its 13 years on this planet, the aged dog had encountered many humans, but never had it experienced a scent like what it was encountering in its olfactory system now. A miasma replaced the familiar clan smell, and it made the terrier's hindquarters tremble. The dog cowered in its shabby basket. It never much discerned its clan's eyes, could never make them out in the general head area, instead going by scent and sound. But the dog sensed those lifeless stares now. For the first time in years, the bow-legged terrier barked. The farmhouse was further away than it looked. It proved to be an optical illusion. The illusion of getting help had clouded the Mackenzies' senses. What at first was a drab farmhouse in the middle of nowhere was now a beacon of hope, and the same effect on the Mackenzies as if they were penniless, homeless and starving, and had just spotted the glowing yellow M of a McDonald's restaurant in the distance. When the complaining kids fell back, Brendan murmured from the corner of his mouth to his wife, "This house has to work. You saw how far we came when we didn't see any houses, and God only knows where the next house will be." Elizabeth agreed. "I'm regretting coming this way." "Why?" Elizabeth cast a doubtful look at the property. "Doesn't the house look abandoned? Even from here I can tell that nobody lives there." "Liz, we're in the middle of nowhere. Look around you. That's the only house out here, and we're going to make it work no matter what happens." For now, Elizabeth reserved judgment. That big old house seemed more and more vacant as they drew nearer. The half-drawn tattered lace curtains had taken on a sun-bleached ivory shade, giving the effect of dereliction and emptiness. The country house was a hollow shell. Brendan imagined desiccated insects littering windowsills in empty drafty rooms, and sucked dry bee and fly carcasses stuck in pockets of sticky cobwebs long since vacant. Not that Brendan was going to mention any of that now to his family. "I think we're going to knock on that front door, and an old farmer and his wife are going to come out to us. That's the vibe I'm getting." That hypothetical old farming couple was the best-case scenario, and he just knew it. Brenda Mackenzie was almost positive that there was nobody at the house to invite them in. Only desiccated insect shells, as empty as the house they lay in. Brendan and Elizabeth linked arms and walked headfirst into the driving rain while the kids traipsed after them. 10 minutes later, they were standing by the rusty, buckled front gates of the house, held together by a frayed string and the Mackenzie family's fraying hope. The house was in a terrible state of disrepair. It was a 2-story farmhouse with grimy pebble-dash walls and a mossy roof of black slate. They could see from the rusted gates and bountiful clumps of grass growing around the base of the mangled barrier that these gates had not been opened for a long time. The front door of the house was another 50 feet away from the gates at the end of a narrow pathway. There wasn't any sign of a bell. Elizabeth called out, "Hello, anybody home?" No answer. "Only the ghosts are home," Jason surmised. Layla hissed, "Don't say that. You know I'm afraid of ghosts, Jay." Yeah," came Jason's reply. The Mackenzies stared at the solitary house through the rain. No matter how hard they gazed at that grubby front door, it just would not open. A pervading stillness told them nobody was at home. "I think I saw the curtain moving," Layla said excitedly. "That's on your imagination," said Jason. Brendan also thought he saw movement at the window. He considered his daughter with a keen eye. He decided there and then to call his daughter's bluff. "Which curtain?" he asked quietly. Layla pointed straight to the window on the right of the front door, and the same window where Brendan thought he saw movement. He nodded. "I saw the curtain move too." While they were looking at the front of the house, Jason wandered off. He walked a little further up the driveway and stopped dead and gawked at something in the backyard. The 12-year-old opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Afraid to raise suspicion, he waved frantically at his family, who were more interested in trying to figure out how to contact the owners of the house. Seeing that they didn't see or hear him, he backpedaled to the front gate and pulled and dragged at his mother and father, puce in his panic. Brendan turned from the house to see the frantic look on his son's face. "Jesus, Jason!" his mother asked. "What's wrong?" "Slow down, Jason," said Layla. The boy was hyperventilating, only able to speak in monosyllables. "Camper van, scruff, people." Jason closed his eyes and marshalled every fibre of his being to control his breathing. The 12-year-old was fearful, and the others could see that fear manifest in his stark eyes, raindrops streaking down his face. Instead of speaking, Jason led the others around the side of the house, where they hid behind an overgrown elderberry bush. Brendan, Elizabeth and Layla broke out in gooseflesh when they saw their van parked up in the backyard, away from the view of prying eyes. The shock of seeing their camper parked up behind the house was one thing, but something else was seeing 4 people sitting in it. They made out the silhouettes of 2 people in the front and 2 people sitting in the back. The strange thing was that they were just sitting there, like cutouts framed in the van's interior. The Mackenzies could hear their dogs' muffled barks and whines, and that only added an extra layer of whipped creepy to this wedding cake for the damned. On hearing Scruff barking, Layla slapped her hands to her mouth to stop her scream, a scream that germinated from witnessing her dog bark for the first time in a long time. It had been a few years since she'd heard Scruff bark like he was woof-woofing now. As age had caught up with him, after all, Scruff was 91 years old in human years, his bark deteriorated into a chesty cough. The 14-year-old's heart ached with every distressed, piercing yap. Layla broke from the group, but Elizabeth dragged her back. Her mother whispered, "What are you doing? You don't know who's sitting in our van." "Scruff wants to get out, Mom." "Yes, okay, but let's think this through." Panicked scratching came from inside the back door of the camper van now, and they just knew the dog was trying to burrow his way out. It wasn't his cute paw-padding toilet call he gave now and again to let people know he needed to do his business. No, this sounded as if Scruff had been buried alive. "Mom, what's going on?" Jason was terrified. The lad's eyes were about to pop out of his skull. "Listen, everybody," said Brendan. "Calm the fuck down. Vehicles are stolen every day of the week." Layla snapped back. "We don't care about the stupid old van. We want Scruff." "And we'll get him," hissed Elizabeth. "But let's be clever about this." She turned to her husband, about to ask him what the next step was, when, without warning, the camper van rumbled into life. They pushed further in behind the sprawling elderberry bush. Whoever was behind the wheel of the van did not know how to drive. The gears ground and cranked. Brendan winced with every tear of the cogs, just as his daughter flinched with every bark. The driver appeared to not know if he or she, though it looked like he, wanted to drive forward or reverse. The van chugged and stalled before roaring into life and shooting backwards, screaming in high revs across the backyard and crashing into the barn. Thankfully, hay bales broke the vehicle's impact. More gear grinding ensued before the van shot forward in spurts and spun out of the backyard, soaking them in a spray of dirty puddle water. As the van rolled by, they heard the dog's uncharacteristic howling and whining. It tugged at their heartstrings to hear the little dog cry like that. They watched the van drive away in the rain, rocket down the country lane, and then make a left back in the same direction they'd come from. The 4 Mackenzies looked at each other, waiting for someone to speak. Brendan asked nobody in specific. What are we going to do? That their father asked that question didn't give the children much hope. Elizabeth was looking at the ground, blinking, lost in thought. Did you get a good look at them? Not really, Brendan answered. I glimpsed the passenger in the front seat. She looked like a normal woman about my age. Doesn't exactly fit the car thief profile. Then again, what do I know? I got a better look at the man behind the wheel, said Jason. He was her husband. Brendan scoffed. How do you know that, Sherlock? Jason answered. Because I've seen them before. What are you talking about? Brendan and Elizabeth asked in unison. Wait! Layla's eyes lit up. I've seen them before too. Layla, started Elizabeth. How would you... Her jaw dropped as the penny dropped. She too had seen that couple, only their faces were different somehow. Maybe it was because of the rain, but the shiny, happy people in the picture on the TV screen on the cafe counter weren't the same people she saw sitting in the front seat of the camper van just now. The news report, she said, in a trance. Brendan raised his eyebrows and turned to the spot at the bottom of the lane where the van had disappeared. You mean to tell me that the people in the... And Elizabeth was already nodding. The same people took our camper van, friends. Just then Jason's stomach growled, so loud they heard it over the whoosh of the rain. It might have been funny in other circumstances. I'm hungry. Me too, said Layla. Me three, said Brendan apologetically. He looked at the sky. It's already getting dark. Let's see if we can stay here. Maybe we can find something to eat. I think we should keep moving, said Elizabeth. What if they come back? Brendan's hungry stomach fluttered with nerves. He was aware his kids were analysing everything, and he was doing his best to keep the authoritative side out, but he was struggling. Firstly, nobody's living in the house. Secondly, it's pouring rain. It'll be dusk before we know it. Brendan always fell into his firstly and secondly when he was under pressure and needed to get his bullet points out. Thirdly, I'm starving, added Jason. Layla was fraught with anxiety, but she agreed with her younger brother. Elizabeth too was feeling the first pangs of hunger, but she held back. They didn't need any extra pressure now. Maybe we can get in and find something to eat. And now that we're here, why don't we... Brendan, if you think we're going to sleep in that house tonight, then you have another thing coming. Elizabeth answered. I think we should keep walking down that road. I'm sure we will come out at a crossroads or something similar where we can flag someone down. She could see everything opening out in her mind's eye, a fantasy land where a car stopped for them and her family rejoiced and hugged before climbing in. Then they could take us to the local police station and we can report the van missing. They will find the camper because it stands out. That's one way of putting it, quipped Jason, who was trying to keep the good side out. Let's take a vote on it, suggested Brendan. Who votes to stay here and try to get inside the house? The children gazed at the brooding building through the pelting rain. It didn't look very inviting, but it was a roof over their heads. However, the creep factor emanating from the property was too much to overcome. They kept their hands by their sides, not willing to vote for their father's option. That's decided, Elizabeth concluded. Let's go. Without listening to any further protests, she turned and marched to the bottom of the lane and turned right, as opposed to their stolen camper van, which turned left the way they had come, and where they knew there was nothing there for them. At least, not enough civilization to bank on. The road not taken was their option for now, and Robert Frost would be proud of them. Only this wasn't the same road Frost hadn't taken. For not 10 minutes down that country lane, or bohereen, as they might say down here in the wilds of the southwest, they came to a dead end. The four of them stood there in the rain, looking at the point where a blackthorn hedge swallowed the road. It was an optical illusion. It's a dead end, Brendan exclaimed. You can say that again, replied Layla with an ominous air. Brendan turned to his family and asked, So who wants to vote for the house now? Reluctantly, the kids and Elizabeth raised their arms. We don't have to sleep inside the house. Maybe we can sleep outside it. Perplexed faces stared back at him. It'll get chilly tonight, but if we all bundle in together, I'm sure we'll keep each other warm in the hay barn. It's full of hay. And we leave at first light. It gets bright at 5:30. We can be on the road and nobody will ever know we stayed there. But all of this is if we don't find anyone between now and dark. Brendan knew the chances of that were next to none, but he kept that to himself. Elizabeth was on the fence about it. She turned to her kids. Kids, I think it's a good plan, said Layla. Jason nodded. Me too. Maybe we don't have a choice, Elizabeth pointed out. Inside or outside the house, we cannot sleep in these clothes, Brendan. They'll get pneumonia. Maybe we can light a fire." Brendan smiled. They turned and headed back towards the farmhouse, crestfallen and soaked, but with a hint of hope now. Feeling it wasn't right to knock on the back door and give any sleeping resident in the house a heart attack, Brenda Mackenzie crept around to the front of the house and knocked. The family looked at each other, waiting for an answer, but nothing came. Brendan pushed in the rusty flap of the letter slot, a feature from a bygone era, and called inside. "Hello? Anybody home?" He tried to sound chirpy. It was strange to imagine his voice echoing out around the house. Brendan imagined his voice echoing through the cold, damp rooms he never visited. It was a strange sensation indeed. He called again, then pressed his ear right into the slot and listened. The father of two couldn't be sure, but he thought he heard shuffling coming from somewhere at the end of the hallway. Or perhaps it was upstairs. It was difficult to tell. Deciding the coast was clear, Brendan stole up to the back door of the house. They looked into the kitchen. It was clear then that no one had lived in this house for a few decades. It didn't matter how rough and ready the property was. Brendan knew he needed to get his cold, wet and miserable family inside. "Stand back," he commanded before clenching his arm and driving his elbow through the pane of glass closest to the door handle. The sound of smashing glass filled the kitchen. Brendan angled his hand through the jagged hole. Feeling about for the key, he found the keyhole instead. Shit, no key. "And you thought the key would, I don't know, somehow just be sitting in the lock, waiting for someone like us to smash the window and turn the key?" Layla asked. Brendan withdrew his hand, careful not to scratch himself. While he was trying to ignore his daughter's sarcasm and considering their next move, his wife pulled down on the door handle. To everyone's surprise, especially Brendan's, the door swung in on its hinges. Elizabeth winked at Brendan and stepped into the musty kitchen. The expression on Brendan's face was laughable, and he knew for a fact that his children would have laughed in his face if they weren't so miserable. Instead, they blanked him as they walked into the interior of the farmhouse. The place was decrepit. Nobody had lived here since the 1990s. By now, Layla's cheeks were taking on a bluish hue, and it was her mother who noticed. "Jesus, Layla." Turning to her husband, Elizabeth said, "We need to light a fire somehow." The house was empty of furniture. "Maybe we can find something outside in the sheds to burn if—" Her words dried to a gulping click when they all heard a distinct shuffling outside in the hallway, down to the right where the kitchen was. Someone or something was standing where they had just come from. They listened to the slow and deliberate crinkle and rustle of dry leaves that had migrated into the hallway. An uninvited guest tiptoed stealthily along the hallway, but weren't the Mackenzies the uninvited guests? More feet skulking along the creaking floorboards. It was pointless trying to convince themselves that was just the old house expanding and contracting or whatever it is old houses do. No, these groaning floorboards sounded too deliberate and sickeningly obvious that they weren't alone. Brendan had tried to convince himself it was nothing more than a plump, whiskered rodent, but those footfalls were too well timed and gathered to be any fat rat. Brendan hated the furry creatures with a passion, but he would give anything to peer around the living room door now and spot a giant rat minding its own business, sniffing through the leaves. Those crunching leaves had registered with Brendan as they tiptoed through the hallway, but now the leafy debris promoted unwanted questions, like how had those leaves come in? The air in here was dead in more ways than one. It didn't have a single waft of a draught that Brendan might have felt in another dilapidated house. Those leaves had to have found their way in here somehow. His heart beat harder, and a wave of fainting nausea came over him. He looked at the others with wide, petrified eyes. There was someone in the house with them. Not only that, the individual had been coming and going for quite some time, judging by the build-up of tree matter around the entrance of the hallway. Then again, there was no rule against the owner of the house coming and going, yet what house owner leaves debris build up in a hallway? Many questions, and not enough answers. Brendan didn't want to scare the kids, but Jason and Layla could see fear in their father's face. Then everything took on a sinister slant when from that shuffling in the hallway crept little feet. The Mackenzies looked at each other in dumbfounded puzzlement. Who or what was in their presence? And then came the strange grunting sounds that might have been words on a different planet. Brendan and Elizabeth shared the same shocked WTF expression. The distance between each footfall was too short to be an adult, yet too gauged to be that of a child. But if it was a child, then what was he or she doing skulking around in this derelict building in the middle of nowhere? Worse again, what was a child doing alone in this building? But maybe even worse than any of that, what if the child wasn't alone? It was a pretty big farmhouse, and they had only seen the small section where they stood rigid right now. Those tiny creeping footsteps inched inside Brenda Mackenzie's head. What if it wasn't a child at all, but a dwarf, a little person? A myriad of strange hallucinations filled Brenda Mackenzie's senses. But he had one thing clear. They needed to vacate this house now, and he gestured as much to the others while doing his best not to panic any of them. He was ready to panic and run like fuck out of there, and the sweat beading on his forehead gave that away. Afraid of his life to confront whatever was right outside the living room door, Brendan considered the 2 windows on the far wall. They were big enough to jump through and low enough not to break a bone. He could live with a twisted ankle. Brendan tiptoed to the windows. They were old-style windows, with a wooden frame that slid vertically. He went to lift the window closest to the chimney when his son hissed, "Shh, listen." Everyone turned to Jason. The 12-year-old whispered, "I think I hear a car." They listened but heard nothing. The Mackenzies might have gone to one window to see if Jason had indeed heard a vehicle, but these windows were facing the front yard. And speaking of windows, the wooden frame had expanded and jammed solid. Red-faced Brendan turned and called for Jason's help. Jason stepped in next to his father. The 2 of them took hold of the window, then heaved with all their might, but the window was stuck fast and wasn't moving. Layla and Elizabeth lent a hand, but to no avail. They tried the window to the right and attempted the same. That window was just as seized up. With a growing sense of impending doom, Brendan Mackenzie closed his eyes, took a sharp, deep breath, and exhaled. He had no choice but to confront the 5th unknown visitor to this house. The father of 2 stole up to the living room door and blessed himself, and that was saying something considering Brendan was a staunch atheist. Peering around the edge of the door, he saw Scruff standing there in the hallway, looking up at him. He was never so happy to see the little dog in all his life. But something wasn't right with the terrier. Nobody else would have noticed, but the same family who had been living with the canine for 13 years noticed. The terrier cowered and displayed uncharacteristic behaviour. Brendan, perplexed, squatted and called the dog. "Hey, Scruff!" Brendan didn't have time to scream. But just minutes before Brenda Mackenzie screamed, the Mackenzies' camper van pulled up, or rather, crashed up. 4 individuals stepped out of the idling van and made a deadpan beeline for the farmhouse. The thunder and rain didn't seem to bother them, and the 4 appeared to walk with some difficulty. It might have gone unnoticed, as people in their twilight years have a limp or a touch of rheumatism or arthritis. But the younger man and woman who climbed out of the stolen camper behind the older man and woman shared that same awkward gait. Anyone would think they weren't in charge of their own bodies. Behind them, a little terrier poked its nose out of the back door and sniffed at the rain, sniffed at that strange smell of crossbreed wafting through the cascading raindrops. The canine turned and went back inside to its worn and warm basket, which was all that was left of the little dog's dying world. Just as the terrier did that thing that made its owners laugh when it turned in dizzying circles to find its resting posture, they snatched the dog from the basket. But Brendan's family, standing behind him, had to scream and run. But the only option to them was the top of the stairs at the end of the hallway. In their panic, they left the dog and their father and husband to fend for themselves. What had they seen standing there at the other end of the hallway? The Mackenzies didn't have time to process as they scrambled up the rickety stairs. Elizabeth's instincts told her to fall behind the children. She looked over her shoulder to see the family of 4 whom they had first seen on the TV news back at the cafe. The mother and father and their grown children were standing there with dead expressions, all floating in that same hypnotic bubble. But it wasn't the expressionless people that got her interest, and nor was it the family that sent the children into a curdle of screaming fits. It was the creature, the demonic creature in all his hellish glory, standing there barefoot on the carpet of dead leaves, with a smile on its face that sent shockwaves through the mother. Those shuffling feet should have been something innocent and explainable, how the mind conjures unseen horrors that only exist in the mind's disembodied crooked eye. But this terror existed, and it went against everything Elizabeth Mackenzie had ever known or believed in. That tapping on the window of her 9-year-old bedroom wasn't a diabolical creature with long, spindly black fingers, but the long branches of the elm tree. At least, That's what her doting parents told her. Mrs. Mackenzie now knew her parents were lying to protect their daughter's undeveloped, fragile mind. Behind her, she heard the cracked screams coming from her husband. She'd never heard Brenda make noises like that, and never wanted to hear anything like that ever again. Those were death screams. The body summoning one last SOS piercing alarm before lights out. Elizabeth called out from halfway up the stairs, "Brendan!" But it had gone awfully quiet down there. From her angle on the stairway, she could only see a few feet of the hallway. Whatever happened out of view. Maybe it was better that way. She turned to her children, but they were already gone upstairs, and for a moment the farmhouse seemed far too quiet. Then, out of that eerie silence, came a couple of pig squeals from above her in this disturbing wave of stereo surround sound. She almost fainted when she realized those dying pigs to be gutted were her own children's cries. And just like Brendan, Elizabeth had never heard her children cry like that. If those blood-curdling screams had come from her children, the gruesome cries could have belonged to any teenager, male or female, but then came that deafening silence, that same silent scream that she'd heard come right after hearing her husband's last genuine cry for help. And from this veil of darkness came the little terrier's incessant yapping, and it was this that brought Elizabeth Mackenzie to tears. Just like her family's death-throw screeches, it was the first time she'd heard their old terrier bark. What kind of stress was the canine under to rekindle his bark, his piercing alarm? Listening to their family pet was like going back in a time machine. She could almost hear her children's giggles as they played with Scruff on the back lawn, and how she would love to climb into that magic machine now as her husband appeared at the bottom of the stairs and slowly began to... But that scream, Jesus Christ in heaven, nobody comes back from a howl like that. It makes little sense. Brendan is perfect. Not a drop of blood on him. Not a... Wait. The eyes. The eyes are dead. The windows to Brendan's soul have been boarded up. To climb the creaking steps, peering up at her with the same unblinking deceased eyes as the family of strangers walking behind her once-upon-a-time husband. What drove Elizabeth up the stairs to uncertain death was the vision that bloomed below when more of those dark figures with strange smiles and delirious eyes appeared behind the hypnotized, possessed family. Elizabeth screamed and bounded up the stairs, running away from her husband and to her stricken children. But a surreal horror was waiting for her at the top of the warping stairs leading up to the second floor of this nightmare. She bounded into the first bedroom she found, and there, lying in a double bed, were more people with no light in their opened eyes. There were 6 of them lying there like sardines in a tin, staring blankly at the ceiling, arms by their sides. Sitting on their chests was one more of those impish dwarfs with a grimacing smile and lunacy in its eyes. Where they had come from and what they wanted was now beyond Elizabeth as her husband took her hand and led her to the second bedroom where Elizabeth shrieked, rupturing vocal cords. Seeing cataleptic Jason and Layla in the gloomy room, lying there on the bed with the other strangers. Another unearthly dark entity was sitting on Jason's chest. It had just been fiddling with his mouth, for the love of Christ. She was sure of it. It turned and considered her with that stuck smile, telling Elizabeth it knew something she didn't, and she was sure she didn't want to know what that was. She fell to her children's side and shook them awake in the bed, only they were awake, gazing through her with their dead-light eyes. Whatever had happened to Brendan in that split second had also happened to her children. Brendan pulled her away. She looked into his eyes, and she knew in her heart and soul that he was trying to look back into her eyes, trying to make her believe everything was okay. But he just looked through her with that lost and misty gaze, almost cross-eyed. The lights are on, but there's nobody at home. The creature perched in her son's chest hissed and growled at Brendan, communicating in strange tongues with Elizabeth's lost husband. In mechanical fashion, he turned from the aberration that had taken him and the others hostage and said in a voice that sounded only a little like the real Brendan's voice, "Crossbreeds." Her voice quaked. "What?" "We are crossbreeds now, and we need to go home. There's work that needs to be done." He attempted a smile, and it was painful to watch. "Those people who took our van, they're confused, that's all." His smile faltered as he looked away in lost thought. "To remember, I can't." His strange smile and words terrified Elizabeth. Tears came to her eyes. "Oh, Brendan, what's wrong?" She sniffled through her streaming tears. "Work? What kind of work, Brendan? What's happening?" Brendan's eyes turned slowly to the cold thing sitting on the entity once known as Jason, then back to Elizabeth. With far-off eyes, he said, "Shh. Come lie down with me, Elizabeth." He says Elizabeth, as if he doesn't know me. She considered the window by the bed. If she ran fast enough, she could launch herself over the people, zombies, and break through the pane of glass. "And fall to your death, head first, Lizzie," she heard her mother say. Sometimes she just needed to hear her say it. Forgetting how she got there, she found herself lying on the bed between her sleep-awake children. Her husband looked down at her, but his gaze went down through her, the bed and the floor. Brendan couldn't see her. Elizabeth was sure he couldn't see her, not really. But what she wasn't sure of was what he could see. That was a terrifying prospect. In his altered state, Brendan wanted her to think he could see her. It was all an illusion. But what wasn't an illusion was the hideous, dark face that appeared next to Brendan's. Those eyes, Jesus, those eyes weren't of or for this world. That grimace that never left its face took on a new meaning when the loathsome phantom of nightmare slowly nodded before it came at her so fast. She just had time to open her mouth wide to scream. That deathly screech never came because something choking got in the way of the cry the second she parted her lips. It was fast, whatever it was, and it was better that way. The Mackenzie family filed out of the farmhouse. They didn't seem to realize it was the middle of the pitch-black night. Scruff the terrier loyally skipped behind their feet. His clan smelled strange, just like the ones he was driving around in circles with earlier. Yet these four looked like his clan. Confused, the terrier paused and then managed to climb up the 2 steps into the back of the camper van. The canine found his cozy basket and twirled around in circles to find the best position. The boy and girl members of his clan always made odd, though comforting sounds. It's called laughter, when he did that. But not now. They just stared at him through eyes that weren't their own, their faces ghostly wan. The crossbred, once known as a man called Brendan, only found the ignition with the tip of the key quite by accident. Everything was confusing yet strangely familiar to him as he slowly found his way around the old crock camper. He crunched the gears and drove away from the farmhouse towards their house in Dublin without his headlights on. He didn't need the headlights to see the dark road ahead. If he had switched on his headlights, they would have washed across the overgrown road sign telling them they were leaving the nowhere district of Abbeyleith. When the Mackenzie family set off on their yearly camping trip, they didn't know they would and wouldn't be returning home.